What does sugar and carb addiction have to do with success in the low carb lifestyle? In today's episode, my daughter and I are excited to announce an interview with the world expert in the area of carb addiction and sugar addiction, Bitten Jonsson. Bitten is an addiction specialist with 27 years of experience. She is a certified and licensed professional who is an expert in the area of assessment and diagnosis of sugar and alcohol addiction. Today we will be discussing perhaps the greatest challenge to the sustainability of the low-carb lifestyle, and that would be sugar and carb addiction. Let's get started right now. So good afternoon, Bitten. We are honored to have you with us today. Can I have you tell us, our viewers, our listeners, your story? How did you get here? And what are your feelings about carb and sugar addiction?
Wow, that's a big question, and I'm very honored to be with you. And thank you for inviting me. Um, Let me say that it started that I was stealing sugar lumps when I was 5 years old. My whole teenage year, I grew up on very good food. My mom cooked everything from scratch, so that saved me actually from getting severe consequences, I would say. But my teenage year was a constant struggle with wanting to eat chocolate and ice cream because that was my favorite drug, and I didn't know it was dangerous at that time. But and in nursing school when I was 19, we started dieting. It was like a fad. We all dieted, which we know is very dangerous. We starved ourselves during the weeks, and weekends we binged on sugar, chocolate and ice cream. And I can't look back and see that I had severe consequences. But being in nursing school, we were dieting, and then we started smoking as an appetite suppressor, which I think a lot of young people do. They think it is because it's in the culture, but actually it was, not to eat so much, to lose weight, which was crazy at that time. And we also started drinking, and I loved both nicotine and alcohol and sugar. So, if to make a long story short, when I was moved to US and came in contact with Americans, and drinking and eating in that way, because it was much more of that type of food in US than we had in Sweden at that time. Today it's not, but at that time. And I was working as a nurse there. My husband didn't like me drinking, so he forced me into a treatment center. This was the 26th of September 1985, which was my last drunk day. And you wonder, how could that and sugar go together? But I tell you that in a little bit. So, anyway, I had one of the best treatments in the world in that treatment facility in California. It was, as they called it at that time, the Minnesota model, a 12-step treatment. But they had a lot of training. They taught us a lot about the brain, about the dopamine, that it was an illness. Many of those things were ingrained into the treatment, which was shocking to me because in Sweden, any kind of addiction was a psychosocial problem because you were emotionally broken or because you didn't have a job, or I mean, all kinds of crazy things. Psychosocial view. It still is a lot in Sweden, I have to say, sad to say. But they were talking about dopamine and the receptors and neurotransmitters and brain illness. And as a nurse, I walked out of that treatment center totally in love with addiction medicine. And I could not, I tried to go back doing nursing, but I couldn't because I felt that a big piece was missing, not addressing that problem in clients because I saw the clients coming to the hospital. I was working the emergency room there in a small town in north of California called Weaverville. And I saw all the clients coming in with a broken leg or beaten up, or I mean, there were so many things. And I could see that behind it, there was an addiction, obesity, diabetes, and we didn't address the addiction. So I had to leave. I had to leave. And I decided I'm going to work the addiction field. I wanted to study addiction more. I wanted to study neuroscience, how to treat addiction, how to help people that were caught up in addiction. Because the word comes from the Latin word enslaved, and that's really what it is. And that's what people that have not been there, they think, why don't you just stop? Why don't you do what I tell you? But once the addiction is developed in your brain, you are like a, missile locked on target. You lose control. And that is the key thing to understand with addiction. Once the drug gets hold of your reward center, your brain, all areas of your brain, prefrontal cortex, first of all, neocortex, limbic system, reward center, reptilian brain, it doesn't connect in the proper way. So you lose perspective on reality. You're actually, in jail in your own head. You're trapped, enslaved, and you lose control. And that makes it so frustrating for yourself because you try to control it all the time. This time, I'm not going to eat too much. This time, I'm not going to drink too much. But once the drug comes into your body and hits, you lose control, totally lose control. And this is frustrating for yourself and the surrounding. Can you imagine? Why don't you just stop? So this is the key thing to try to help people that are afflicted with this problem to understand.
I want to tell the viewers so that everyone understands where we're coming from that all three of us right now that are here in this room, so to speak, are devoted to helping people reverse chronic disease. And I am not an addiction specialist. Bitten is. And the reason why we're together is because I learned very early on in this when my daughter and I started to reach out and try to help people reverse or put into remission gout, reverse diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and so on using low carb, high fat ways of eating. And we discovered right away that we were having to push back against this thing that we didn't understand in the beginning, because I think it's safe to say that it doesn't matter who we've communicated with, whether it's people in clubhouse rooms or specific clients. The major hurdle is getting past the need to eat the refined carbohydrates, the sugar, the high fructose corn syrup, the agave syrups, the desserts, processed food. And for some of our clients, this is really, it's a very big deal. We know from interacting with other people in this field that are doing this that, like, for example, Virta Health, I've had conversations with some of their senior coaches, and we know that long-term diabetes reversal depends on keeping these people in the low carb lifestyle indefinitely. And oftentimes you hear superficially that, well, this lifestyle is not sustainable because you can't eat low carb indefinitely. And that's actually not the problem. The problem is that people go back to the way they were eating before. Predominantly, they bring the carbs back in, and it happens slowly and over time, but eventually they go back. Now, I want to hear from you, Bitten, but I want to provide statistics, a little bit of statistics here to our audience, because I know from discussions that I have that we get this pushback all the time. And we're talking about a controversial issue right now. We're talking about sugar addiction. And, when you go out into the media, there are great forces that are saying, no, you can't be addicted to sugar and so on. So let's just talk about at least what the data looks like here. And then we can go into the weeds on this, because I'm a believer that this is the main problem. If we want to have somebody reverse diabetes, they have to be willing, unless they want to go down the management track, they need to be willing to give up the carbs and the sugar, and I'm using that now as a broad term. And the alcohol. Those are things that got to go right off the top, and it's a problem. So, firstly, uh, if we look at sugar consumption, it starts really early. A baby hits, they hit the floor, metaphorically speaking, and as soon as the breastfeeding's done, the stuff that they're eating is really high in sugar, somewhere around 12 teaspoons a day. I looked up deliberately. I went to Gerber this morning. I'm going to use names. I don't care about the ramifications here. I went to Gerber, and I pulled down their natural apple uh, baby food. It has 14 grams of sugar in it per serving, and the serving is the whole bottle, right? Uh, when we look at teenagers, they're somewhere around 18 to 19 teaspoons of sugar a day, and then we've got the young adults at 20, and the adults are coming in somewhere around 25 teaspoons a day, depending on where you look. Uh, but I took a strong average of this, because if you're looking up the amount of sugar ingested in the U.S. per year, right? You come in with low values in terms of pounds if the organization is behind the sugar industry. You come in with high values depending on who's on the other end of the spectrum going, you guys, there's really a problem with this. So if you take the average, it's 100 pounds a year. Now half of that is fructose. If we just generalize and we go, okay, we're talking about table sugar, then half of that is fructose. And anyone who's followed Richard Johnson's work knows that we know data-wise that fructose actually lights up the same centers in the brain that light up when you have other drugs like alcohol, opioids, heroin, and so on. Right? That's so we actually have data for that. And then I want to just finish with this and open the floor back up to Bitten. Um, so alcoholism, at least the sites that I could find, show that anywhere from 6 to 8% of the adults in the U.S. have got a drinking problem. Interestingly, and I don't know how valid this is, and Bitten can maybe comment about it, but the Yale Food Addiction Survey shows that 5 to 10% of U.S. Adults are also sugar addicted. So I find it really interesting that those two things, the alcohol, abuse of alcohol, and sugar addiction, they almost overlap. The average puts those two percentages. Granted, this is epidemiological, right? It's correlation, and I know it's not causation, but it makes me wonder when I see two numbers like that come out so closely related. So I want to turn this back over to Bitten. What's your opinion about how prevalent the sugar addiction thing is worldwide? Because you're coming to us from Sweden, and how does this correlate with alcohol?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that that is very understated, those numbers. I would say that alcoholism is probably more like 15%.
Okay.
6 to 8 is extremely low. I wonder really what kind of a screening instrument they have done. I work with both screening and diagnostic tools, so I can see it's much higher. I did an interesting survey once in Sweden when it comes to sugar addiction using the same instrument you screen for alcohol, which is called UNCOPE. You can look it up at evincediagnostic.com. Very interesting site. And I'm certified and licensed in both diagnosing alcohol, pills, drugs, and sugar addiction, which is very real. Anyway, it was about 400 nurses at the nurses fair in Sweden here, and they answered the UNCOPE 6 simple questions. You have it because you got it in your material from me at the Nutrition Network, and 1/3 was indicated social users, They had 0 to 1 yes, because everybody has overeaten sweets at one time, so that doesn't tell anything. Then we have something called harmful use, 2 to 3% yes on 2 to 3 questions on the UNCOPE, and 1/3 had that. This is maybe 10 years ago. And then 1/3 had 4 or more yes to the UNCOPE on sugar and flour, carbs, carb addiction. So that would say that about 33% indicates that they could have a sugar addiction. And I would say that today, with all the processed food we have today, I would say it's more like 40. So sugar addiction is incredible prevalent, and it's a huge problem in the whole world. The problem, Pete, is that very few people are trained in the medical field. People are not trained to screen, assess, and diagnose, which is my goal, to teach professionals to do that whenever you meet the client, because you really hit the nail on something. These clients come to low carb keto professionals and they really are dedicated to change lifestyle. They want to get help. But if you don't address the underlying addiction, you can't help them, because it's going to be another diet for them. They try this dieting, and then nobody addresses the craving, the insane cue induced craving, the stress induced craving, which we as addicts have. So they don't treat that problem. And you're totally right. You said, then they start going back eating carbs. And that's like putting gasoline on charcoal, on the fire, boom. Because again, they lose control and they go back to the eating. And the shame that happens when we do that, because we didn't understand what really happened. We could try to control it, because you helped me be healthy with your method. So I felt much better, right? So now I think I can have a piece of chocolate. But that piece will just totally hit my reward center and turn me into a maniac. And I would run to the store and buy loads of it. And I'm back in the pit again. I'm feeling miserable. And of course, I'm going to blame myself and think that, I'm a failure. I couldn't. He helped me. And I felt healthy, and now I blew it all again. So, why doing anything? This is exactly the pattern we see. And that's why it's so important to train professionals that work with helping people with health to look for addiction, because that is a primary illness, not caused by anything else. It's caused by the drug on the brain. And sugar is the gateway drug. So sugar causes alcoholism. You see what I mean? Because, nobody's exposed to alcohol when they are 3 years old. So the first tough exposure on the reward center of someone that have a sensitive brain, which we have if we develop addiction. And the drug is very potent. Fructose is extremely potent as a psychoactive substance on a small, undeveloped, because, a baby's brain is not developed yet. Prefrontal cortex is not developed until you are about 25, 30. So you hamper that whole normal, beautiful development of a human brain. So it's going to be like this. Instead of several pathways in the brain, you have one 18-lane highway for sugar. And that's going to lead you, if you drink alcohol on that 18-lane highway, you see what I mean? It just blows up, and you're going to start being alcohol addicted too. And then you might go on to drugs or pills or what have you, process addiction, screens, gambling, and so on. And suddenly, that person is trapped in an addictive rut.
Right. So this was the reason why I talked about the fact that we start feeding sugar to our
Yes,
babies. And
yes.
this is a progressive thing, and one of the things that you've talked about in the training that I had with you was the fact that this is a progressive thing. But what's happening from a very young age is that uh, people are eating sugar and they're doing it regularly. So we're building this activation in the brain. And would you agree that there's probably brain wiring that goes around that constant introduction of that signaling?
Absolutely. The brain gets hampered in the wiring and also wrongly wired. You get false negative thoughts, false feelings that you act upon. So the whole system is, like under a blanket, under a wrap. And one thing that I've thought about that a client said to me, that I thought about is interesting for us that knows a lot about the metabolic dysfunction. We don't inject heroin, we inject, no, we don't shoot heroin, we shoot insulin. And that was an interesting metaphor, I think, because when we eat these things, you pump up the insulin. And what's going to happen is that blood sugar drops rapidly. And that's going to cause cravings. So you need to eat something again. And then you are on that roller coaster. So I think this lady, she wasn't really aware what she was saying, but I thought, interesting. Shooting insulin instead of heroin. So,
Yeah,
and I tell
because
you what, the
absolutely.
clients
So
that I've treated hundreds, thousands of clients through 28 and a half years when I work with this. And I have talked to many that are heroin addicts, that are alcoholics, pill addicts, cannabis addicts. It is much easier to quit those drugs because you don't need them. It's much tougher to quit sugar because you need to eat and you're also exposed to this food all the time. And we have something called cue induced craving, which means that our reward center, our brain, reacts on smelling like chocolate or bread and seeing it, seeing the drug. We react. We don't have to put it in our mouth, and we are the exposure is horrible. So it's very tough to treat.
so here's where I would like to go with this, and hear your thoughts about it. So here's the quote: "Knowledge gives hope, hope gives willingness, and willingness gives action." So I think from the coach's point of view, one of the frustrations that I have had is trying to have the kind of discussion you and I are having right now with somebody that after interacting with them have the signs of sugar addiction, right? You've talked to them enough to know that they have there's a pattern in the way that they're eating and what exactly they're eating over the course of a day. But how do you is it possible? I guess what I'm trying to ask is how do you get the person, not the coach, to develop enough of awareness that they get to the third part of this quote? Because in order to make it or help somebody make a change, they have to be at that place where they want to actually take action. Do you have any insight how we get them to that point?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to joke and say that's one of my superpowers is to make you an addict. By no, but to embrace that you have this. What I do is I explain how the brain works, and I explain that it is a problem in the brain. I talk about the wiring, the connection, the neurotransmitters. So as a coach, you need to have knowledge about these things, not in a deep way, but you need to be able to maybe show them the picture of the brain and show what's happening and tell them you are trapped, the drug is ruling you, you're not ruling the drug. So, and also then the good thing is to talk about the consequences they have in their life. But usually people talk about overweight, that is the problem. But I talk about, all these negative thoughts, negative feelings. They don't need to be really depressed, but they have anxiety maybe, listlessness, things are not so fun, they have pains and aches. I go into all the four areas: physical, psychological, social, and spiritual. And with spiritual, I'm only meaning, joy in life, happiness, joy, meaning in life. And I talk about those four areas and help them to see the consequences that develop everywhere. And so I said, you're actually trapped, you know, and addiction is a brain illness. It's not your fault. I tell them that many, many times. And I also ask them, how many self help books do you have? How many cookbooks do you have? How many trainings have you been to? How many videos have you listened to? And I tell you, it's numerous, numerous. They have tried Weight Watchers, pills, powders. I mean, you can name it. I talk to them about that. And then I have the real big tool, which is the sugar diagnostic tool that I showed you guys.
Yeah.
So I see that if we get somebody to do the sugar diagnostic, which of course take a few hours and need to be done by a trained licensed professional, that is usually the big thing that makes them really back down and see, oh my, this is what my life looks like. Because then you get that whole chronographic picture of how this has affected your whole life. And we start talking about this and that and all the different ages and when this happened and this happened. And we put all these consequences that we have mapped out on that chart. And of course, my experience doing hundreds and hundreds of those is that people start crying many times. Then they said, oh, thank God I have an illness. I'm not crazy. I'm not dumb. I'm not stupid. I'm not a failure. I'm not a loser. I have an illness. So you have to help them see that they didn't cause this to themselves. This happened, when they were kids. This process started. And that's when you do the sugar. And then they said, okay, tell me what I'm going to do. And then you pick up on the do, not read, not talk, not listen, not, these things, not analyzing, because there is nothing to analyze. And I said, okay, here what you do. Tomorrow, you eat this thing, you make a commitment. Because then they're going to say, I don't know if I can live without chocolate. I don't know if I can live without bread. They're going to tell you that honestly when they see the pattern.
No,
And I
yeah,
said, okay,
exactly. I've heard that. I've
yeah,
heard that exact quote about the
yes,
bread.
I know, Pete. I know, Pete. They have told me that so many times. I felt like that when I understood this about myself. How am I ever going to have fun without chocolate and ice cream? And I thought that when I quit the alcohol and the nicotine, of course. But that's the sick part of your brain, the addictive part of your brain is screaming, don't take it away from me. So, how do you create that power for them to start? Well, you say to them like this, okay, this is, you can never think for the rest of your life. You never know how your life going to be. You don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now, right? So let's do this. Do you think that you can, be abstinent or drug free from the sugar drug for one day, 24 hours? Can you
24
do
hours.
that? And they tell you, yes, I can do that. Okay, let's start there. Only there. And every morning, from now on, you have from me this, commitment. Only for today, I'm going to stick to the food plan Pete has given me. For today, I'm going to do that. And then you give them several tools, to physical activity, how to work with sleep patterns, how to work with breathing, how to work with group support. Because as professionals, we provide professional groups, where we have a program, they come to us, we teach them, we follow them, we coach them, we have assignments. I mean, that's a professional group. You help them go into a support group parallel with that, where like minded people talk about how they cope with the changes, the coping, you know, where they can support each other. Like, uh, today was a very horrible day. I've had cravings all day long, but I stuck to my food plan. I stuck to my food plan. I took my walk. I called some of my peers and talked to them about my pain and my cravings. And this day will be over soon, and I have made it so far, and tomorrow is another day. So I'm giving you a brief of the whole program that we, of course, we give them several tools. So, and also you have to explain to them with traditional therapy, when it is more of an emotional, psychological problems, you start by analyzing the thoughts, the feelings, the urges, like I feel miserable, I want to hit you, or I want to escape, and actions. And Traditional coaching and therapy focuses on changing the thoughts and the feelings so that you can change behavior. When you work with addiction, you have to do the total opposite, because you can't work with the negative feelings and the false feelings and false thoughts that's created by the addictive part of your brain. So you have to tell them, you have to draw this and show them this is the normal way, but you and I going to do it different. We only going to focus on changing behavior. We have to start here, changing behavior. Then we can look at urges. Then we can look at feelings. Then we can go up and look at thoughts. So you work the other way around. And I think like this. Uh, if you tell me to do something and I ask you, why should I do this? And you said, well, it's good for you. Why should I do it? But if you, in a very simple way, can talk about, the brain, the insulin, what's happening in your body, you give them pieces, not overwhelming, small pieces of information and knowledge that they can use to work on one day at a time, 1 week at a time. They're with you. They will be with you. So that's how you do it. And then you have to be prepared that this is a horrible progressive illness. So your clients will relapse. It's like any other chronic illness, flare ups, remission, flare ups, remission. And the thing is to provide understanding from you for that type of pattern. So when they are in a relapse or they lose track of a day or something happens in their life, they will come back to you and say, Pete, help me. I fell off the wagon. But if we as professionals don't understand this pattern, we think, why did you do that? Why didn't you stick to the food plan? You can't talk about that with an addict. You have to say, okay, I hear you. You fell off the wagon. Let's look at what could happen. What do you think happened yesterday that made you pick up and eat? What happened the day before? And then you say, okay, what we're going to do now is revise your recovery plan. You might need to take away doing these things right now because that's too stressful for you. And you need to add these tools because you miss doing them. So you just, plan, replan, replan.
Let me interject. I want to make sure, as we're having this discussion, that any of our listeners realize that I am not golden here, right? I struggle with my relationship with alcohol in my life, all right? And part of the reason why we're here this morning is because I have that personal issue too that's related to me remaining successful with the low carb lifestyle. But so I want our viewers to know this. It's not like I'm sitting somewhere on a pedestal somewhere and I'm shaking my finger at everybody out there and trying to hit them over the head with a hammer about this. All right, that's number one. I'm here because I want to understand this better so we can help the people that we're working with more effectively. What I want to ask you about is the fact that you spoke a little bit earlier about the obesity thing. People finally coming to you, they've had it. They've been trying all the diets and this and that. All right, I've experienced this too. But what about, and I think that there's data out there. I know you're familiar with Lustig's writings
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
about these things, that we've got maybe even a higher percentage of thin people, uh, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. I think that was the category that I was in. That also need help, and I guess um, I'm wondering how you get somebody who is actively uh, chasing sugar and drinking alcohol, maybe on a low level, right? And this is the thing, like, and my biggest day, I mean, especially as I got older, I never had more than 3 beers. I had them every single day at the same exact time every day. 4 o'clock would roll around and there's the trigger, right? And I've seen this even in my extended family, right? That same, almost same exact pattern, and males who look basically like me. With the exception, well, I've been on the ketogenic diet now I'm in my fourth year. 3 years I've got in, right? Now I'm in my fourth year. So I've lost 30 pounds of weight. I don't have a beer belly anymore. But I see this, I've gotten to the point where even if I'm walking around in a shopping mall, which I don't do very often, but when I do, I can see the mark. You know what I mean? You get into this field and you start watching people really closely. And there's a lot of men whose waist is well over 40 inches, but they're not, apparently obese. So the question is how do you reach that group, or am I off base here? Do we just worry about the people that, to use a quote from a doctor once, that are literally hemorrhaging on the side of the road? That's just a metaphor, right? How do we reach these people who think that they are fit? I'm a little overweight. I'm a little overweight. That's it. Actually, and some will even argue, because I'm a little overweight, Dr. Pete, I'm going to last longer in the hospital if I get pneumonia than you are, right? Okay. So how do we reach these people? Can you give us some strategies from the coaching point of view now?
Well, I talk, first of all, I tell people I'm not a weight loss coach. I don't work with weight loss in any way, shape, or form, even if it's tiny overweight or big. I heal brains. And
Yes.
your weight isn't really saying anything about how your brain is affected of what you eat. So I talk about food for the brain, how you heal the brain with the right food, and that the brain is the most important organ. And I used to joke and say you can't go to the hardware store and buy material for your brain. So I'm very interested in what you put in your body that goes to your brain for optimal health and functioning. So I start on that and tell them things about insulin and all that kind of thing, and also belly fat, even if they have. And I talk about carbs, and I talk about, as humans, we're not used to eat all these carbs or drink all these carbs. That's what I do. So I asked them that, and I said, tell me how you eat, and I can see, I can help you to improve your health. So I don't use the word you're sick. I start with improving your health, and most people are interested in that. They always want to improve something, sleep or physical activity or breathing or health or whatever. So that's the road I go down with them. And also I tell them that you can be looking anorectic and having a sugar addiction, because then the starving and binging pattern has become a way of coping with the insane craving of the sugar. So anyone think that a really skinny person, you can eat what you want because you're skinny. And I said, sure, if you want to destroy your brain, do that. Go ahead. I mean, because it's your brain that's important. So I move it from the body up in the brain.
Right.
And then I start again mapping out all those consequences. How do you sleep? How do you breathe? How's your stress level? How's your mood? Tell me about your mood, and so forth. And then we find those things.
Right.
And that's the way I go.
Can you speak to the concept of outlets? That's where this conversation is leading me,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
we have a sugar addiction going on. I believe to some level, and anyone who's interested in low carb lifestyle, right? If they have some reason why they're talking to us about it, we already know that we're going to be up against the carb issue, that they're going to have. So, what are, but also I understand now after the training with you that there are outlets, that generally speaking, if you've got one issue and it's the sugar addiction, which is where you start with all of this, what are some of the likely outlets that they also are shifting in and out of?
Well, it's both intake addictions like nicotine,
Right.
alcohol, painkillers, you know, cannabis, all forms of that. So those are some of the intake um, sedatives. That's very common because you get stress and sleep problems when you eat sugar. You get wired and tired. I used to say you're like a Ferrari that they glued it to the garage floor, and you push the gas pedal, but it hasn't doesn't have any brakes. So you're very dangerous, and people can relate to that. Burnout feelings, wired and tired, extremely tired, but their brain go woo 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 woo. They have a hard time relaxing and falling asleep and so on. So I start talking about these things. That's what's happening, and then they start medicate. They go to the doctor and ask for sedatives, sleeping pills, which is just making the problem 10 times worse, because now you're numbing everything, so you keep eating. And of course, you don't attack the real problem, which was underlying, or you get antidepressants. And of course, uh, some of these pills, the sedatives, the painkillers, the tranquilizers, the antidepressants, are saving some people's lives if they're used in the correct way in the correct time. But many people start with them in a period due to symptoms from sugar addiction or alcohol addiction or something, and it's not a treatment for that. And then they get stuck and addicted on them and keep eating them and eating bad. So now you have several outlets. And then maybe you start escaping with sitting on your screen all the time because you don't have any energy. Watch TV or, gambling or whatever. So you get into a lifestyle that is very limiting in your development as a human being in all areas of life. You don't really have a life. You are just trapped in your addiction. And that is extremely sad to see, that you're going to meet people that are stuck in that rut. And I'm sure you have met them.
If we do get somebody who is finally at the point where they actually want to take action, right? Can you talk about the social issues that are going to be associated with that? Because we've been talking about an individual person who's fighting against these cravings and whatnot. Um, Now they're going to try this existence in a world that I call a carboholic world, right? It starts, maybe they have a spouse or a partner, right? What is the situation with them? There's the inner circle of the closest friends, and then there's the social interactions that are outside of that layer, for example. And those can be really difficult situations for anyone who's actually trying not to eat sugar, because and again, I want to just make sure everyone understands sugar is the entry point here in the low carb lifestyle. It's the first thing that's got to go. We're not even talking about right now limiting other carbohydrates. We're just talking about the top layer, which in a lot of respects maybe is the most crucial. But what are strategies do you think that our listeners can hear that will help them with the social aspect, the pressures that are going to push back against their need not to have sugar and maybe not alcohol, right? The two of those things going hand in hand.
Well, that's why I told you earlier that it's extremely important that these people have like minded people that are doing the same journey. You have to go into a group and get support for the pressure from the outside. And we talk about teaching the family too when we work with people in group. How do we teach their family? And we also try to help them, to give them ways to meet food pushers and saboteurs. I wrote a paper about that. How do you deal with those people? What do you say? And if you go and say, well, I can't have sugar because I'm a sugar addict, if you say that to workmates, they laugh at you. Say, oh, be silly, have a little bit, blah, blah, blah. So we tell people in the beginning to not go out and say that. It's enough that you know it and you have support of other people in the group. But just tell people that, I have some health issues, and you don't have to declare what those are. So I'm going to try to eat a little bit different for a while. You just be very fussy about it like that. Teach people to do that and say, I'm going to try eating this and see maybe my sleep improve, or maybe my energy level would raise. So you don't even have to go into details. So when people have done like the 4-day intensive with me, which is a starting process for the whole treatment chain, I tell them, don't go home and try to save the world. Just go home and start facing your own life and say, I'm curious about trying to eat in a different way. I'm curious to see if this will help. That's what you teach people to say. And then remember, they have to have that closed support group available at all times. I mean, we have one in Swedish with over 10,000 members today called the Sugar Bomb. We have one in English, the Sugar Bomb in Your Brain, which is a support group for people where they can go. And many of the people I've trained, professionals, work with online coaching, online groups. So anyone that hear this now and want help, there is a lot of help available. So we teach each other, these things. And I used to joke and say, in the beginning when people questioned me all the time many years ago, God, you're crazy. How long are you going to eat this crazy food, the low carb? That's not healthy. You have to quit eating it. I felt always, put down. And now I have so many snotty one liners I could tell people, but nobody asks me nowadays because everybody knows that, this is very sustainable. And I also like to say that, I'm very, today, after all these years, if people, ask me something about this, uh, let's say that this professor say that low carb is dangerous and this one say this and blah, 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 and somebody asked me, I said, well, here in Sweden, I can say, well, that professor can't read English because all the studies are in English, or he is a sugar addict himself, or he has stock in a sugar making company. Those are the answers I make because people, what we're doing is very important. And we have to help people to stand up against that. And I like to point one other thing. You touched on this, and I thought it was very good that you said this. In order to work this field, we have to think primary prevention. How do we help parents to not have their kids become addicted? How do we support them? That's primary prevention, is to stop something from happening. Secondary prevention is early detection, and that we do with a lot of knowledge. Tertiary treatment and prevention, that's helping the really sick people that come to us, knowing that we might not fix all the consequences, but we can sure help them to have a much healthier life. So all those areas we have to include in our work today.
One of the things that I learned in your training is that when you start somebody, that basically you need to bring to a stop the offending substance, right? In this case, we're talking about sugar. But how do you deal with, I mean, so one of the things that I think about in this as a coach, so now we're jumping back to the coach side of things, is if you have somebody that isn't just, you suspect that they're a sugar addict. There's daily alcohol. Like I already touched on this too. Maybe it's not, they're not drinking a bottle of Jim Beam, but every day there's alcohol involved. That's usually combined with sugar. And they're taking something at night so that they can go to sleep and sleep through the night, right? And maybe there are other outlets, that you don't know about. So what is your point of view about how you start with that, right? Because do you just focus on the sugar, or at the point you said 4-day intensive, so maybe at that point you already know, you suspect anyway, several of the outlets. So when you start with them, are you eliminating all of that, or are you prioritizing?
No, the process addictions like maybe TV, or because they don't have any energy, is very, you don't touch that right away. And I usually don't touch nicotine until after they are drug free from food, sugar, flour, carbs, sweeteners, all that, and alcohol for about 6 months, because that's too tough. We could take all the outlets if we have them in house in a good treatment facility. That wouldn't be a problem. But most people can never afford, and there aren't really any treatment facilities either. But you have to take the most potent drugs, because if you would only take away like the sweets, the cookies, the cakes, and you would leave the pasta and the bread and
Right.
the rice. That's not going to work because that's going to trigger the craving for the sweets.
Yeah.
So, of course, you can't do that. So, what I've done, and the alcohol will trigger the craving for the carbs, and the carbs will trigger the craving for alcohol. So, you have to start with that. And then, of course, as an addiction specialist, I know that I really assess people's drinking. So, they aren't really high consumers because if they go cold turkey, they could have a delirium. So, that's what you need to understand what you're doing when you do that. That's why I use those diagnostic tools.
Right.
I do a deep diagnostic assessment on them if I suspect that this is bad. Otherwise, I have found that working with addicts, working in group is the most efficient way where they support each other, where I teach them. Like the one I'm going to do in Bristol in May is one of those 4-day intensive where I'm going to teach professionals how to do it because I'm going to work with clients and then show them. And I always done that going cold turkey. And people, they don't have a big problem because they get so much knowledge, they get group support, they are in a very nice setting together, they do it together. And you have to understand too that the power of being together with people when you do something is increasing neurotransmitters, oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine. So there are many tools provided in one thing. I used to say that working one-on-one with addicts is like chasing a slippery soap in a slippery bathtub. And it's hard on the clients, very hard for them. Very few people can go home and do it cold turkey all by themselves. They need to be cheered, pepped. And as a coach, you can't be there 24/7. But if
Right.
they are in a big support group, they can be there for each other. It could be an online group, it could be a WhatsApp group, just that they can reach out and say, I have cravings from hell today. And you just talking about it will lessen it. And then people are going to pitch in and say, hey, do this, take a glass of water, take a walk, call and tell me about it. Let's talk about it. So that's what's so important in the first big phase of helping them out of this. But you can go cold turkey, yes.
So I wanted to jump in because you brought up nicotine addiction. I actually am and have been a nicotine addict since 2017. It started with my roommate actually. I was overweight. I don't think I was overweight. It's just like when I looked at myself in the mirror, I wasn't happy with how I looked. And she was basically, she was a nicotine addict herself, so I noticed her saying commentary of like, well, if I had this, like I don't end up eating. And that became a part of my lifestyle. And I have to say that quitting that was the hardest thing. It makes me emotional. It's the hardest thing I think I've ever had to do. And actually, in 1 month, I'll be, I call myself sober, for a whole year. So I've been really proud of myself because it was really hard to quit. And I think that what my dad just brought up about being, thin on the outside and fat on the inside, I think to my lowest point, which was in 2020, right? I had taken a mirror picture of my stomach and I looked like I was really in shape, right? I looked like, I was slowly starting to get out of CrossFit, going full time because I had a really bad nicotine addiction, specifically with vaping, the jewel pods and everything. And I was 115 pounds, what I weighed in high school. And I look at that picture and it reminds me of my lowest point because I was so addicted to something that, when you think about it, like I couldn't leave my house without ravaging to try and find it, because I wasn't going to make it through something, a social event or anything without having that nicotine high. Like it was like a part of me, right? To now, and of course with the nicotine addiction became, I tried to quit and then your sugar cravings get really bad. Like, oh my God, they were terrible. Like just, and I didn't really have a support. I actually quit cold turkey. Not really. I relapsed a little bit in February. I say a month from now because I quit in February of last year, but I relapsed in March with it. And then I quit officially in March 26th, 2021. Um,
Ooh.
So,
Good.
but that process that you're talking about, that walking myself through, I mean, I had to do so much research. Like, I had to mentally do so much research on how I was going to quit this because I felt like crap. Honestly, my stomach, I couldn't eat anymore. My stomach was upset. If I ate food, I felt terrible after I ate food because of the nicotine, and then my breakfast was coffee and nicotine. That's all I like had up until 6 or 7 o'clock at night. So I just think what you're doing is so incredibly important for somebody who has suffered that. And I tell people now, like, I can never have that again because I think about it. I mean, I seriously, like, I get stressed out and I have a really bad day and I'm like, oh, I need to go, find like my jewel pod or a
Good,
cigarette
right.
or something. And it's a really scary thing. And I think that you talking about nicotine and also food addiction and alcohol is so important because when we think about it in our society today, those are the three things that people seem to not even care about. They're like, well, it's not that bad. It's not okay, but if I can't even leave my house without throwing up the pillows trying to find where my little vape thing fell in between the cracks, like that looks pretty bad to me. And so I just, yeah, that was my commentary. And the social stuff is really hard because everybody my generation, my age, I'm 26, all of my friends have been doing it for years. Everybody has been doing it. And it's all to look skinny. I mean, literally, that's still
Right.
to this day. It's like if you want to be skinny here, this quits your eating ability. Like you won't eat as much with this. And the social part is really, really hard. I had to get myself, I didn't hang out with my friends for a really long time um, to get myself out of that because I knew that if I did, I would go and I would relapse again and again and again until it was, like here, I wouldn't be a year now. So I think what you're doing and what you're talking about is so important. And the fact that you're emphasizing the three things that society seems to not be able to live without, and those are the three factors that can make us absolutely miserable. So that's my only commentary.
Absolutely impressed you have done this.
It was really hard. It I did literally a lot of research. I had to know exactly what I was going to be feeling every single day, and I did what you were talking about with when I first quit March 26th. I knew they call it the terrible threes, right? Three days, 3 weeks, and 3 months are going to be your hardest part, and it was true. I mean, and I got the worst like conditions, like the nausea, the headaches, like the exhaustion. It was terrible. And I actually have to say that up until about 6 months ago, or a little bit less, 5 months ago, is actually when I stopped having to take naps in the afternoon to fully recover. Like my body, I think, was still so like used to having this drug that was so stimulating that it wasn't until about 5 months ago is when I woke up and was like, I don't need that, I don't need a nap today. And I'm back on low carb eating full time. So yeah, anyway, sorry.
You're showing how really, really dangerous and powerful that drug is. Incredible dangerous. And also you point out that many young people do it. And here's one interesting thing. You said you look at picture, but you weren't fat, but you felt fat. And this is what I tell young people, when they tell me, well, I'm fat, and I tell them, but people say I'm skinny and I could eat. But listen, you could have insulin edema because you eat carbs that increases insulin. You're swollen. 1 gram of carb binds 3 grams of fluid in your body. And I think this is one of the problems, and this is very important for us low carb keto coaches to explain to the public that you don't have to look fat, but you could be swollen on the inside, and that's very unpleasant. And then you're swollen in your brain and you feel foggy brain and tired, and you nod now, T, because you recognize this. So, and then when you were doing nicotine, which is both an upper and a downer at the same time, that's why it's such a dangerous drug. Then you saw what happened to you, and you didn't eat when you were doing it. And also you went through all that hell. And I think that if we help people, I think, low carb keto is the normal way of eating. We are the normies. The other ones are the carb wackos. So I used to tell people that. And so I'm not the one eating a screwed up diet. I'm eating the way we should eat. But anyway, so if we help people, with the food and then the thing. So did you eat low carb when you were detoxing from nicotine?
I ate pretty much low carb. I definitely, when the cravings got really, really bad, I would have like a piece of chocolate or something. And actually, mentally, I had to be really easy on myself because I knew that if I was going to be struggling so hard with this, I was also, I mean, and I was doing this alone, right? So I didn't really have like someone to bounce ideas off of like, how do I handle this really bad craving? So I was in South Dakota and I ate pretty much low carb. There was a couple times I obviously gave in to more high carb diets, not diets but meals. And in that case, I was like, well, you know what? At least I'm not like going straight for my to go buy a pack of cigarettes or the jewel pod or whatever it may be, like. So I definitely remained pretty much low carb throughout the whole time, but there were a couple meals where I did have like higher carbs, but not like I would have had off of my. I've been low carb 2.5 years, so not before like I was eating the high carb diet where like pasta, pizza, or whatever. It was more like I would have a piece of chocolate or a couple pieces of chocolate, but remained low carb for the rest of the day.
I think that was the lucky thing that you did eat low carb before. It could have been 10 times worse and you might not have made it if you had been eating it the standard diet, because your craving had been so incredible strong for sugar, try to quit nicotine, that you would have just started binge eating or whatever. So that's one thing that we learn when we take away these drugs, those top three, the sugars and alcohol and nicotine, that it's very important to take alcohol and sugar first and then go on a really stable low carb diet for at least 6 months and then do the nicotine with support and knowing what you're doing. So that's my advice, if we're going to do that.
First off, T, I want you to know how proud I am of you, because I didn't know this until this morning. So, like, this is a big epiphany here that we're having in a public setting. So, I'm really impressed with what you did. Just understand that with your journey going forward, that you can rely on me for support for sure. We are getting up against an hour now, and so to be respectful of your time, Bitten, we should think about closing out. What do you have any lasting advice? And mainly, I don't want to focus on the coaches. I want to focus on the people that are having these problems. What would you say to our audience? What is the first thing that they ought to do? Even if they're not at that third level, I was trying to point out earlier where they're actually ready for action, but what kinds of things can they do to think about where they are in this process? Like, how does someone gain awareness? Am I a sugar addict, for example?
Absolutely. I would say this: if you know that you hide, lie, and sneak with certain foods, you do have a serious problem. And this will totally destroy your brain and your body in the long run. So I want you to think about, caring about your brain. Think about your brain and think you want to give the brain the best food, the best fuel, the best nourishment, and to really go forward with a lot of happiness, joy, and health. And that you can start by talking to any one of us. We are a lot of people today that are professionals that work with this. I teach other professionals. I can anyone that emails me, I promise I will answer and refer them. So, take this first step, and that you didn't cause this to yourself. It is the drug causing it to you. So you have to let go of the shame and the stigma and thinking you're a bad person. You're not. You have a brain illness. Come on, let's help you. What we do, we're not going to fix you in a way, but we're going to give you knowledge so you can improve your life. We can't fix anyone, but we can give you knowledge. And, knowledge is not a heavy burden to carry. And knowledge is also the only gift you can give away and still keep. I think that's excellent saying about knowledge.